From our nation's capital, this is the Washington Report with Minnesota Congressman Rod Grams. An inside look at issues affecting the people of Minnesota's 6th Congressional District.
Hello, I'm Rod Grams, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Washington Report. Remember the last time you heard about something going on here in Washington that made your blood boil? Well, you probably called my office or sent a letter, but beyond that, you really didn't know what else you could do. Well, in addition to the efforts of my staff and myself, there are national citizens groups that are based here in Washington that are working tirelessly to keep your taxes low and to stop wasteful government's programs. And today I'm pleased to have with me two special guests from two of these groups. First, Tom Schatz, who is president of Citizens Against Government Waste, and also Elizabeth Sauer, who is director of mobilization at Citizens for a Sound Economy. And I want to thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to join me this morning and to talk a little bit with the residents of Minnesota's 6th District about what really goes on in Washington and more or less what their involvement can be. I know they, as we mentioned, a lot of times I think voters back home feel frustrated by some of the headlines that they read and ask questions of why was this done or how can I get more involved to get my voice heard louder in Washington. First, let's, Elizabeth, start with you. Maybe describe your organization a little bit, the goals, the type of organizations.
Thank you for having me, Congressman. Citizens for a Sound Economy is exactly what its name implies. It's a citizens organization, national organization with 250,000 members across the country. We have 3,700 members in Minnesota, 315 members in your congressional district. And Citizens for a Sound Economy was organized to give the consumer a voice in Washington. We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. We're very proud of that. And basically what we were created to bring sound economic policies to the consumer. What Citizens for a Sound Economy does is take complicated economic issues and boil them down to how does it affect you as an individual or you as a family, and then giving those tools to consumers so that they can get involved. We deal mostly with tax and budget issues, trying to reduce taxes. We believe the government has got too large and is making too many decisions for consumers that they themselves could make better than the government. And we also deal with trade issues, with regulatory issues, and with all of that research that goes into formulating our policies, then we give the tools to citizens so that they can get involved. And because we believe that congressmen, although they will listen to good sound policy, they want to know what their constituents think. And so what we do is we give them the tools, like teach you how to write a letter, teach you how to make a phone call, but in addition to that, how to hold organizational meetings, how to participate in rallies, or give you the questions to ask at your town hall meetings, or we organize our own town hall meetings. In fact, right now we're in the middle of trying to get people educated on the health care reform issues, and we're trying to promote free market reforms for health care. And so we're holding town hall meetings and breakfasts and educational meetings and teaching people how to get involved in government politics.
I think what you said too earlier is very important, and that is how do you boil it down to where they can very simply ask the question, what is going on? Because the issue seems so complicated. Healthcare is not a simple issue. There's so many different sides of this question, and to exactly know, and here in Congress you're kind of baffled by the number of bills that are on the table, and to study and look at each one and to try and make a decision on what's best. And for the consumer out there, I mean, there's hundreds of articles and issues to read and try to, to get educated on this as well, because they're very concerned of what's going on. So that's not an easy task.
No, and for example, we have a booklet called Healthcare Reform, and it takes the average family through healthcare reform. And what it does is it has a scenario for government-run healthcare versus consumers making the choices. And it takes the average family, a mother and a father and their children, through the healthcare system and explains exactly how that impacts them, and then gives them suggestions on how to make sure that they are in charge and not the government in charge. And so that's what we try to do, is boil it down to easy, understandable terms. And then that makes people feel comfortable with getting involved with the process and how to communicate then to you and to other congressmen and senators.
Tom, in your group, some of the goals and also the type of membership.
Well, it's a little bit redundant to Citizens for Sound Economy. National membership, we have 600,000 members. We have Taxpayers Action Network, which is a grassroots operation through our lobbying group, the Council for Citizens Against Government Waste. We hold rallies usually in October, Taxpayers Action Day. We were created really as a follow-up to the Grace Commission. Also 10 years ago, Peter Grace issued this report to President Reagan. And President Reagan said, please don't let this gather dust on a shelf, and Peter Grace and Jack Anderson got together, created Citizens Against Government Waste, and we've been moving forward ever since. In tracking the Grace Commission and other waste-cutting recommendations, we've helped save about $250 billion since 1986. So even as the deficit and debt have grown bigger, it would have been that much worse. We work closely with the Congressional Grace Caucus, of which you are a member, of course, and work with members on all kinds of ideas to reduce the deficit, reduce the debt, and give more back to the people who know a lot better how to handle money, and that's the taxpayers.
So we always say they can make the best decisions at home of what's right for them or their families, and without relying on a bureaucrat in Washington to tell them how their money should be spent. Who are your members? You talked about your memberships. Who are involved in these groups, and how do they get involved? How can they get, to become a member of Citizens for Sound Economy or Citizens Against Government Waste?
Well, we have, as I mentioned, groups around the country. We have an 800 number. It's 1-800-BE-ANGRY. People see it on advertisements. In fact, we're running ads on CNN and Headline News to basically promote something we call Prime Cuts. It comes out around April 15th, and it helps identify just how much of everybody's individual income tax dollar is going to waste. Usually it's around a third, and we identify the actual spending cuts that could be made to equal that number of 1/3 of your individual income taxes. So the word gets spread through our mailings, through the media, through a lot of different ways, publications that people see and hear about, like our pig book came out in February. This little thing has about $1.2 billion worth of pork barrel spending that we've pulled out of all the appropriations bills. We have about $6.2 billion overall, and it's an educational research process and dissemination of that information around the country. But it can be a homemaker, it could be a senior citizen, it's just anyone who's concerned about what's happening with their money.
Well,
And that should be everybody.
right. Our membership is much like his. Our membership is primarily two types, regular consumers, grassroots America, who, homemakers, senior citizens, but we also have a very important group of community leaders who are very involved with our program, mayors, city councilmen, church leaders, civic organizations, and they have become a very important part of what Citizens for a Sound Economy does, and in that way they can spread the word to their memberships as well. And we work with community groups to try to get them involved and their groups, because their voices in conjunction with their organizations can influence that much more what happens in Washington. But for the most part, our members are those people who believe that government has become too large and too intrusive in our lives, and we give them the tools to become involved. And anyone can become a member. We do as well have an 800 number where you can get information, and primarily right now we're distributing information about the health care reform, but also on taxes and spending. And that 800 number is 1-800-CSE-3-CSE. And that way you can get information about our organization, and as well as the current issues that we're working on.
Now, I was home over the Easter weekend break here from Washington and held a series of town meetings, and it's very similar to other meetings I've held in the past and what I hear of other congressmen. It seems like a lot of people that come to these meetings are frustrated of what's going on. They see, why isn't spending being reduced? Why is the government getting larger? And they say, you campaigned on many of these issues. Well, we do have many of the bills on the table, but they don't get addressed into the committees. But it seems to be this voice of frustration. But I tried to give them encouragement, because a couple of things, they have made a big difference. In the budget of 1993, in August, when all those calls came in, I was telling them it was a little bit, it was a great job, but it came too late. The deals had been made, the budget passed. But H.R. 6, I think recently in this session, was a good example of what the average citizen can do when something comes up that they're against, and the phone calls that we received and the faxes that came in. Is this an example of how they should really mobilize when something comes up? They can't on every vote. We make 600 votes or more in a year, but there are many very important votes, major votes, and this is what I try to encourage them. And don't be throw up your hands in disgust, but see the accomplishments that you can make. Elizabeth?
I would say that you're right. We try to convince constituents that they do have a voice and that they have the ability to make a difference. And what we try to teach them is that yes, you can make a difference. And in addition to writing letters and making phone calls, they can attend town hall meetings, they can hold breakfasts, they can sign petitions, they can do mini rallies in front of their, district offices, or, speak out to their constituencies. We also give you the tools on how to write a letter to the editor, how to participate in a call-in talk show on the radio. There are several ways that you can get involved in that constituents really can make a difference. And there are a variety of different ways, we also give them the tools on how to make a lobby visit, how to go visit your district office or go visit a district office of a senator, or with their, we also deal with state issues, and so that they can, go deal with their state senators and state assemblymen. And there are a lot of ways to get involved, and we provide those tools and empower them to make a difference in Washington, because I would hope you'd agree that hearing from your constituents is the most important in making decisions.
Very much so. Tom?
Well, one of the better ways to do it is for groups to get together and work together. We work with CSC very often, National Taxpayers Union, kind of the big three of taxpayer groups here in Washington, and then we go beyond that. We work with some environmental groups, for example, on certain issues, concessions management in national parks. The Superconducting Super Collider was a good coalition that went out to get rid of that particular project. So when you look beyond just around your area, your hometown, and you work together with other people, because obviously you do honestly a good job of trying to cut waste. It's frustrating. So reach out beyond that. They're going to have your vote on most of these things. You need to get influence on other members of Congress as well. And the way to do that is through the national organizations who can then work together and point out the major votes that are coming up in Congress. The Balanced Budget Amendment, even though we didn't get there, it was brought up very quickly. We got a discharge petition. There's something else that's going on right now, the Andrews-Zelliff A to Z session. They're very close to 218 co-sponsors. Get a discharge petition. That would enable Congress to have a series of spending cut votes, just up or down, all recorded votes, bring up anything at any time. It's a very important process. It gets beyond the committees that are saying, we don't want to hear or know about any of these reforms. We just want to go ahead with business as usual.
I think a good example is our Family First bill that Congressman Tim Hutchinson of Arkansas and I introduced last July, and we relied on groups such as both of yours to really get out, and the grassroots efforts and the calls that we've gotten and the efforts we made got the Family First bill as the centerpiece of the Republican alternative. But much thanks goes to groups such as yours who really rallied the forces and helped bring this to the surface. So there, I think, is a good example of where individuals and groups such as yours really make a difference in getting this legislation through. Now when people look at your groups and say, well, we make the phone calls, or we help in your efforts, what is your jobs then in Washington? You have more hands-on contact, say, with individual congressmen and groups in order to try change policy. Tom?
Well, it's to inform our people about what's going on.
Through news conferences?
Through news conferences, through the media, through communicating with them. Honestly, people criticize some groups like ours because maybe they think we write too much. But they don't hear the kinds of things that we're telling them unless we communicate with them. I once said to somebody, are we supposed to do this by telepathy? I mean, you have to write a letter to tell somebody what's going on. And we keep them up to date on issues that they're aware of. They were involved in the organizations because they know we're going to keep them up on certain issues. Again, like the Balanced Budget Amendment, like a bill, for example, yours over in the House, we put into our newsletter. We've written letters on specific legislation asking people to send a letter back to their congressman saying, I want you to support this bill, I want you to vote for this. That's basic grassroots politics, and it's really the wave of the future. We've got to overcome all of the special interests that have access, influence, day-to-day contact here in Washington. Neither of our groups, honestly, are big enough to take on every single thing. Just to pick one example, rural electrification. I don't know what your personal stand is on it, but they've got 42 lobbyists here in Washington. It's one of 500 issues that our groups might be interested in mutually. If you take that on, you've got to overcome an awful lot of opposition. Same with the superconducting supercollider. We had to overcome an awful lot of opposition. But by working together, informing our members, getting them to respond, it turned out to be a good job and to get rid of something that we thought was a waste of money.
There are several ways that we communicate with our members. First of all, through the mail, much like Citizens Against Government Waste. That's one way to get them informed and involved. And we have newsletters, we have regular updates that go to individuals. But in addition to that, we also do it through the media. We do television commercials, we do radio programs, we do print media, and try to educate them that way. But probably the most important way is the face-to-face contact. We have on-the-ground operatives in anywhere upwards to 12 to 30 states, depending upon the issue. We have someone there that they can communicate with. For example, in Louisiana, we have 3 people on the ground, a couple people in Baton Rouge and a couple in New Orleans, who will actually go out and meet with an organization or meet with an individual, educate them on Citizens for a Sound Economy and what we're doing, and then give them the tools on how they can communicate with their elected officials. And we believe that the more you go outside of Washington, outside of what they call the Beltway, the better it is to educate people so they feel that we're real and that they are, that they can really make a difference. So, in addition to mail and through the media, we have a personal touch back at home and try to communicate and help them, one-on-one become involved in the process.
Well, that's a good point. We've done some regional conferences. In fact, some people, Carl Parks from CSC, came to our conference in Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, and they're both training and educational conferences, and I do a number of speeches around the country, and Elizabeth is absolutely correct. When you get out there and see these people, radio talk shows are a very, very good way of doing that as well, and you hear from them. It gives you a better feeling about what they're thinking about and helps direct our agenda as well. Yeah,
Citizens for a Sound Economy tries to involve individuals as much as we can in everything that we do, the constituents. It's not the Washington people from our office, it's our membership back at home. For instance, we're doing we're doing television commercials right now and radio commercials on the health care issue. And so what we did is we went out to Louisiana, or we went to Oklahoma, and we got real members of Citizens for a Sound Economy to be a part of the commercials and let them tell each other and tell us how they feel about what's happening in Washington. It's not actors, it's real people and how they're affected and how they feel about what's happening in Washington and the fact that they can get involved and that they have a right to get involved. And that's what we try to communicate, is that they have a right to get involved and to participate in the political process.
We talked about some of your accomplishments in the past, and you have made a big difference on many issues and many items. What about the next 12 months? What are some of the major goals, Tom, that you're working on right now, or your group, or that you see as very, very important, that you're going to be putting some of your best efforts into this year?
Well, we're going to have another balanced budget amendment vote early next year, so it's important to prepare for that, to lay out the record of the votes this year.
Somebody said you can't debate it on the floor of the House because you've lost. You have to do a lot of preparation, be proactive in the months ahead of these.
Exactly
That's
right.
what's very important.
That's exactly right. I mean, you start working on the next vote the day that you get the vote in the House. And it's not just obviously getting it to the floor. It was 12 votes short in the House, 4 votes short in the Senate. You start looking at, again, we can't influence elections, we can't get involved in elections because of our tax status. That applies to both groups. But by informing people, that's a public education process. Say, this is how this person voted, this is how this person voted. Let them make up their own minds, and then make a decision at the polls as to whether or not they want that person to come back. If the balanced budget amendment is that important and that critical, it's something that they can think about. We also do our ratings for members of Congress, which we will put out again this October. Again, part of the educational process, letting people know just how their members of Congress are doing. So those are kind of the very broad efforts that we're doing to let people know what's going on. Usually about 20 votes each session come out in those ratings.
The primary issues that we're dealing with, that we're trying to prepare, all of the issues that CSC deals with are consumer-driven. What is in the best interest of the consumer? And in that light, of course, in addition to health care, because we're all consumers of health care, we're also dealing with telecommunications deregulation. We believe that, deregulating the telecommunications industry will be very good for individuals because they'll have better access to telecommunications, better access to in-home services, and so that will be a very key issue for us. In addition, we also work on balanced budget and reducing taxes and line item veto, but our primary issues, and in addition to that, is trade. You know, we believe that the United States produces the best products, and we can trade on a free market, and that's the best way to prove it, is that through a free market we can compete. And so we'll be dealing with the GATT, promoting the GATT. So telecommunications, healthcare, reducing taxes, and balanced budget amendment.
Let me just throw in something else about healthcare. We're also getting involved in that. We issued a report earlier this year that laid out a number of options other than the President's proposal. And while people may think, well, we hear the President's proposal is dead, never assume that. Because he is still the President, he does have a lot of influence, and until something actually moves ahead, you can't really be sure what the outcome is going to be. And as you mentioned at the top of the show, there's an awful lot of confusion as to what's going out there. I mean, our concern is the choice of physicians, the potential for rationing, and of course that $700 billion new bureaucracy that they're putting into place, which I don't think anybody wants.
And I always try to tell people at town meetings that there is so much rhetoric from all sides promoting, their bills or their programs. But people need to have some information so they can begin to sort through the rhetoric. I mean, the goals are much the same on all bills, on accessibility, portability, affordability, pre-existing conditions, things like that. But I always say you got to look at how do we get from point A to B. Who is going to manage it? Who's going to be in control? Is it going to be you, or is it going to be the government? That is probably the most basic question. But it takes a lot of information, because rhetoric, I mean, people can promise a lot, but it's how do you deliver and who runs and who takes
It's a
control.
fundamental difference in philosophy. Is the government the one that will make the best choice, or are you as individual consumers better at making that decision? And through history, we believe that consumers have made the best choices for themselves, and if the Postal Service or the IRS, or problems with military spending, or any indication of how the government runs programs, we again believe that consumers themselves make the better decisions, and it's a basic fundamental difference in philosophy. And if consumers get involved, they can say, hey, I want to make the choice on my health care, or I want to make the choices with my money instead of giving it to the government via high taxes. And it's just Citizens for a Sound Economy believes that consumers make the better choice.
I mean, we all make mistakes in decisions or choices or purchases. But I think by and large, the overwhelming majority of decisions made by a family is best for that family, because they're the closest. You can't be in Washington or in an office somewhere and know what's best for you or Tom and how it affects your family, except for you yourself. In our meetings, or during the Easter break, what you mentioned earlier at the top of the show was the feeling that government is getting too big. And if there was an overwhelming, and many times verbalized in just that form, that we feel government is getting too big, too intrusive, too overwhelming. And the question was, how do we reduce government? And I think polls are showing that that was a concern back in the late 70s, that the federal government was getting too big. The Ronald Reagan era, who came in promising smaller and more effective government. But now, after the first year and a half of the Clinton administration, we're hearing again the concerns of a government that's getting too big and too invasive. So I think there's that overwhelming feeling of how do we reduce this? How do we get control? And do you find that when people are feeling this way, that you're getting more calls and more inquiries probably? Because if there's a disaster there, people respond. If there's a concern, people respond. So I was just wondering if at this time, if there isn't a heightened awareness by citizens calling both of your groups. Tom?
Well, I think I would absolutely, and I think it's not just people calling. I think it's the mainstream media is finally paying attention. We've been doing our pig book now since 1991. That's 4 years. The last 2 years, we've gotten national news media attention, and our purpose, of course, is to disseminate that information. So we're very happy about that. People know what's going on. When we first started 10 years ago, and I'm sure the same was true of CSC, you had to convince people this stuff existed. We're way beyond that now. People are angry, they're getting active, they want to see something done, they're bringing it into the campaigns, they're asking questions about members, they're even confronting the president these days about, well, what are you doing about this? They're angrier as a group. It's interesting, though, because they ask their members of Congress, what can you do? How can you help us? And then they say, well, don't make the government bigger. So I think when somebody asks a member or a senator that question, The response shouldn't be, I'm going to create a program to solve the problem. The response should be, let's figure out how to solve the problem within our existing resources like any other organization would do. And if it requires something new, let's make sure we get rid of something that's not working. Let's measure these things. Let's figure out if they're working. I think people would not mind paying the taxes if they thought they were getting a better return on their investment. But a $4.5 trillion debt, individually that's about $17,000 per year per person, is not exactly what they have in mind.
Our calls have probably doubled since President Clinton came to office. The calls and the interest in our organization, the interest in getting involved has blossomed. And to me, that's a great indication of, people just frustration, of being frustrated, and they just want to know how to get involved and how to be a part of it and how to really be effective. And I think it's encouraging to know that people are angry enough now to make a statement and to get involved. And if any indication is the program that we're doing with high school students and college students, they in themselves are angry and want to get involved, and that's very different. Before, kids were more apathetic. They didn't care what was really happening in Washington. They didn't understand. Now they're frightened of what's happening in Washington and what this huge debt is going to mean to them as individuals. And I think it's refreshing to see people angry enough to want to get involved.
In about 15 seconds, Tom and Elizabeth, as you mentioned, government belongs to those who show up. You encourage people. How do they get in touch with you?
They can give us a call. The number is 1-800-BE-ANGRY.
And Elizabeth?
It's, give us a call at 1-800-CSE-3-CSE.
CSE, Citizens for a Sound Economy.
Citizens for a Sound Economy.
So again, government belongs to those who show up. Don't throw up your hands in despair. Dig in your heels. It's time to really get involved and participate.
Absolutely.
No matter what your view is and no matter what issue, I always encourage people that the only way they're going to make a difference, not just if they believe in what I believe in, but what they think is right in government, but you have to get involved.
It's their right.
It's their right. Tom Schatz, who again, President of Citizens Against Government Waste, and Elizabeth Sauer with Citizens for a Sound Economy, I want to thank you both for taking your time to join us today. Thank you for taking time to watch the program. We'll be back next month with more information from Washington. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us on the Washington Report, which is provided as a public service by this station. Comments or questions for Congressman Grams